Well, Jonathan Portes, the Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London, joins me now to discuss the immigration debate. Professor, thank you for your time this evening. In general terms, do you agree that legal migration is too high at the moment?
No. I think it has been very high over the last couple of years. But as your previous guest said, that is partly temporary factors, refugees, and the recovery after the pandemic, which led to shortages in various sectors. It is, as he and others have also said, and I pointed out, now coming down very sharply. You need to look at this over a period of several years, how the system works for the UK, its economy, society as a whole. So it is coming down of its own accord. It's natural that it should fluctuate up and down in recent years. But overall, we need immigration. It's good for the economy overall. And in particular, the people who've come over the last couple of years, most of them are in fact working. They contributed essentially all of the employment growth that we've seen since relative to before the pandemic, partly, of course, because we've had problems getting, with sickness and disability among people who are already here. They're boosting the economy. They're funding public services because they pay in more in tax revenue than they take out. And if we reduce immigration too sharply, the next government will be faced with a choice as how to respond to that. Are they going to put up taxes or are they going to cut public services?
Professor, just explain that correlation between immigration and a boost to the economy, because there are some that might argue that because growth has effectively flatlined for quite a long time now, and indeed even the OBR forecasts aren't particularly generous when it comes to future growth for Great Britain, that's aligned with a large amount of immigration. I cited that figure of 2 million people having come into the country in the last parliament alone. So some people might say, well, immigration doesn't equate to economic growth, but you'll probably argue there are other factors for that flatlining.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Immigration is absolutely not a silver bullet. There are all sorts of other things going on. We've had a set of fairly incoherent and damaging economic policies over the past few years. But too sharp a cut in immigration certainly would, as the OBR has also said. And the OBR has quantified the impact it would have on growth on the public finances. And a very sharp cut in immigration, in their view, and indeed in mine, would lead to this big hole in tax revenues, hence requiring tax rises or public service cuts.
On the other hand, though, Prof, there is an also cogent argument to suggest that if the OBR bakes in that forecast of around 330,000 people coming into the country a year, and we haven't got the infrastructure to make up for that, we're not building enough houses, and indeed there's already strains on the NHS, doctors and dentist appointments, then it's going to be difficult to sustain that level.
Well, that's right. But of course, that 330,000 represents a pretty significant fall. So we have, as we discussed before, that fall is already in some sense baked in. But remember, we have to pay for things like the NHS and we have to staff things like the NHS. And so for the NHS, for example, when you have relatively young migrants coming in who tend to work, often in the NHS in care, they're putting more in to both the financing and the staffing of the NHS than they are taking out. In fact, if we hadn't had that large influx of people for the health and social care sector over the past couple of years, the whole thing really almost certainly would have fallen apart completely.
OK, Professor Jonathan Portes, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening.